Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dan Mosley, Harlan County Judge Executive and KACo's Second Vice President. It's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Ms. Vallie Smith Collins, who has an incredible story to share with us today. As a salesperson, travel was a key requirement of Ms. Collins' job. On January 15, 2009, a work trip put her on U.S. Airways Flight 1549, what you and I remember as the plane that landed on New York's Hudson River. Ms. Collins is here to share the details of her experience during that flight and subsequent rescue that has become known as Miracle on the Hudson. She will always share what she learned from that experience that will hopefully inspire and motivate all of us here to treasure each and every day, because as Ms. Collins says, every day is a lucky day. Please join me in welcoming motivational speaker Vallie Smith Collins.
Cactus 1549, 700, climbing 5,000.
Cactus 15.9, departure to contact line, maintain 15,000.
Maintain 15,000, Cactus 1549.
Cactus 15.9, turn left lane 270.
This is Cactus 1539, hit birds, lost thrust on both engines, returning back towards LaGuardia.
Okay, you need to return to LaGuardia. Turn left heading up 220.
220.
Tower, stop your departures, got emergency returning. It's 1529. He bird strike, he lost the thrust in the engines, he's returning immediately.
Cactus 1529, which engines?
He lost thrust in both engines, he said.
Got it.
Cactus 1529, we can get it for you. Do you want to try to land runway 13?
We're unable. We may end up in the Hudson.
All right, Cactus 15.9, it's going to be left traffic to runway 31.
Unable.
Okay, what do you need to land? Do you want to try to go to Teterboro?
Yes.
Teterboro, Empire, actually, LaGuardia departure guy, emergency inbound.
Hey, guys.
Cactus 1529 over the George Washington Bridge, wants to go to the airport right now.
Wants to go to our airport. Check. Does he need assistance?
Yes, it was a bird strike. Can I get him in for runway 1?
Runway 1, that's good.
Cactus 1529, turn right 280, you can land runway 1 at Teterboro.
We can't do it.
Okay, which runway would you like at Teterboro?
We're going to be in the Hudson.
I'm sorry, say again, Cactus? Cactus 15.9, radar contact is lost. You also got Newark Airport up at 2 o'clock in about 7 miles. Eagle Flight 4718, turn left lane 210.
210, 4718. I think he said he was going in the Hudson.
Cactus 1529, you saw him?
It's early afternoon, January 15th, 2009, and I've just stepped aboard U.S. Airways, Flight 1549, that's scheduled to fly from New York's LaGuardia Airport to Charlotte, North Carolina. Once in Charlotte, my plan was to board another airplane that would take me safely home to Knoxville. I stepped on board the aircraft, which was an Airbus A320. And the way an A320 is laid out on the inside is you've got a center aisle down the middle and you've got 3 seats on each side of that aisle, so a total of 6 passengers per row. I take a look at my boarding pass and I quickly figure out that I've got an aisle seat, which makes me pretty happy because I like aisle seats. Then I became a little disappointed when I realized that my aisle seat was on the very last row of the plane. And I can't tell you why, but I typically like to sit closer to the front of the plane. But I'm making my way to my seat over the PA system. They're telling us it's a completely full flight, find our seats, stow our belongings, we're already behind schedule. So I put my briefcase up in the overhead and I'm just about ready to sit down when I notice something a little odd. Because draped across the back of my seat was this baby blue baby blanket. So I grabbed the blanket, I see the flight attendant in the galley, and I said, "Ma'am, this isn't my blanket." She said, oh, I'll take it. Well, beyond her, I see a mom in the galley with a young baby, and I thought, well, there's the rightful owner of the blanket. So I sat down in my seat and looked to my right and noticed that no one was yet in the dreaded middle seat, but there was already a gentleman at the window. Corporate professional, looked to be about my age. And you know, sometimes when I get on planes, I'm chatty and sometimes I'm not. Just sort of depends on my mood. But I thought, you know what? I'm gonna strike up a conversation with this guy. Well, the way I did that was I noticed on the empty seat in between us was a magazine, and it was a magazine about hang gliding. So I said to him, "Oh, you're into gliding." He said, "Well, I'm into hang gliding." So I proceeded to go down this tangent and explain to him how my husband Steve and his brother have just taken a glider plane trip over Chilhowie Mountain, which is near Chattanooga, Tennessee. Well, he kindly explains to me how hang gliding and glider planes really have nothing in common. Heck, with hang gliding, there's no plane. But he said to me, he says, because that's my hobby, he said, I always pick a window seat because I like to look out. And I said, oh, I always pick an aisle seat because I like to get out. So we're both pretty happy at this point. A little after 3:20, they close the front boarding door and we start backing away from the gate. Well, as we back away from the gate, I realize that no one has come to sit in our empty middle seat. So I literally looked at my seatmate and I said, well, this must be our lucky day because we're going to have all this elbow room to Charlotte, right? A little did I know how true those words would be in less than about 10 minutes. Sometimes I am asked if it was a completely full flight, why did we have an empty seat in between us? And that is because the baby counted as a passenger, even though he was sitting in his mother's lap. For LaGuardia standards, it really didn't take us very long to get to the runway, get our clearance for takeoff. We go barreling down the runway and we're in the initial climb out of LaGuardia. And for the first 90 seconds, it was like every other plane trip I've ever been on. But somewhere between 90 seconds and 2 minutes, at an altitude of just about 3,000 feet, we hear this boom. And the plane dropped, not a lot, just a little bit. But I looked at my seatmate and I said, what was that? And he said, it was birds. I said, oh. Well, then I looked to my left and I see smoke and I smell this awful, awful odor that we now know was burning goose flesh. I hope y'all didn't have chicken for lunch. But that drew up this memory in my mind. Because about 10 years before this, I was on a flight that was a very turbulent flight. You may have been on those type yourself, where you're just sort of bouncing around, making a little nervous, a little sick to your stomach. And I remember when I was on board that particular flight that there was a pilot who was a passenger like I was. He leaned over to me and he said, ma'am, do not worry about turbulence. He said, that is just a customer service problem. He said, all we worry about in the cockpit are birds and fire. So I thought, great, we've got birds and fire. This is not good. About that time, the flight attendant comes up from the rear galley. She's trying to get something from behind my seat. I presumed it was a fire extinguisher, so I got out of my seat to grant her access, and she and I had a little bit of a heated exchange. Because I said, do you want me to call for the flight attendant? She says, I am the flight attendant. I'm like, I know, but do you want help from the front? And she said, no, ma'am, I need you to sit back down. But she told me she wanted me to sit in the middle seat that had previously been empty in case she needed that aisle seat. So I sat down in the middle seat, buckled up as tightly as I could, and I looked at my seatmate and I said, I have 3 children to raise. Kind of like nobody else on board had anything to live for. But I've got 3 kids to raise. He looked at me very calmly and he said, I have a daughter and I'm going to see her tonight. Well, I tell you, I wanted to believe him with every fiber of my being, but I didn't. I'm an engineer. I'm a frequent flyer. And I realize at this point, there's no thrust, there's no engine noise, and we aren't climbing. And typically, jetliners don't crash and have people walk away. So I found myself sitting in a moment that I truly believed was my very last. So I'll ask you, if you found yourself sitting in a moment that you truly believed was your very last, who would you want to call? More importantly, what would you say? Well, the answer for me was pretty easy. I thought of Steve, I thought of our children, I thought, shame on Steve and me because we don't keep up with details like what airline, what flight number, what connection city. So I thought, he doesn't even know I'm on board this plane. It could take him hours, days, a week to get confirmation. So I looked down at my feet, and there's my purse with my BlackBerry telephone sticking out. So I pulled out my BlackBerry, I turned it on, and I sent Steve a text message. And it was a 1-sentence text message that said, My flight is crashing, period. Now, as a graduate of the University of Tennessee, go Vols, I am going to brag and tell you it had perfect punctuation and spelling. Steve later got on to me. He's like, honey, could you have not said I love you or kiss the kids or it was real? But I told him, I said, as I'm typing it, my seatmate said, put that up. You're out of time. Really? Really, God, at 37, I'm out of time? My great-grandmother, she had her hip replaced at age 104. On this particular day, 3 of my 4 grandparents were still alive. So it'd be a bit of an understatement to say I come from some pretty good genes. And I always pictured 97 at the nursing home for me, not 37 in a plane crash. But fortunately, I accepted the Lord in my heart a long time ago, so I was very clear on where I was going. I do remember thinking, well, God, if this is your will, I accept it, but I'm not crazy about it. I'll take a little bit of a time out here and tell you about the atmosphere on board the airplane at this point. It was really about as quiet as it is in this room. From where I was sitting, I could hear no yelling, no screaming, no panic, no engine noise. The only sound I remember hearing was this loud whoosh of air going by. Have you ever been in one of those automated car washes and your car gets to the end and the great big dryers come up over your car? Well, that's precisely what it sounded like. And the passengers on board our flight, like most flights today, we represented a cross-section of this great country. We were young and we were old. We were male and we were female. We were corporate CEOs and we were housewives. We were Buddhist, we were Muslims, we were Christians, and we were atheists. We came from all walks of life. And after the experience, most of us were interviewed. And we were asked, so what was going through your mind in the 3.5 minutes, which is the time from when the birds knocked out both our engines, till the time we landed on the Hudson River? What was going through your mind? Well, interestingly enough, we fell into 2 pretty distinct groups. There was the first group that reported that their life sort of flashed before their eyes. They did that rewind on their life. And then there was the other group, which happens to be the group that I fell into, that were thinking about all the things we were going to miss. I'm not going to be the mother of the bride. I won't see my youngest son hit his first home run. Who's going to plan their birthday parties? So I was very sad about all the things I was going to miss. And then over the PA system came the most calm, steady, in-control voice that I've ever heard. And that voice said 2 really short sentences. He said, "This is the captain. Brace for impact." Well, the brace position for me was I was seated in my seat. I was bent over with my arms underneath my legs, sort of folded down into a sandwich, if you will. And from the back of the plane, I could hear the flight attendant chanting, "Brace, brace, heads down. Brace, brace, heads down. Feet flat on the floor. Brace, brace, heads down." It was just this melodic chant over and over and over again. And then in my ear, I hear my seatmate, who I kid you not, is still looking out the window. He says to me, "Be ready. We're going in the water." Well, I told you, I'm an engineer, so I like data. I like information. I was not 100% sure what to do with that tidbit of information. Do I take off my shoes? Do I hold my breath? How do I get ready to go in the water in this airplane? So I thought, okay, airplane water landing. Most likely what's going to happen is this plane is going to cartwheel. It's going to bust into a lot of different pieces. So Vallie, if you're conscious, just swim to the light. Swim to the light is what I told myself. And I think this is an example of one of those times where mentally what we get ourselves prepared for has a whole lot to do with how well we accept the reality of a situation. when it actually occurs. Because mentally, I got prepared for the very worst. But fortunately, the worst didn't happen that day because Captain Sullenberger and First Officer Skiles, they made a textbook landing on the Hudson River. And part of that landing required that they bring the tail of the airplane down first and hit the water at about 160 miles an hour. Well, I had the good fortune of sitting in the tail of the airplane that hit the river at 160 miles an hour. And I won't lie to you, it was rough and it was violent and it shook a lot. But when we seemingly stopped and I looked up and I was in one piece and that plane was in one piece, my first thought was, well, that wasn't that bad. I've had worse landings on runways. Now, the first words I said, I did not remember saying until I met my seatmate about 9 months later, and he told me what I said, and it is embarrassing. But I'm going to tell you anyway. He said, I popped my head up, I looked at him, and I said, open that window. He's like, okay, where's the button? Well, you all are really smart, and you know that airplane windows don't open. But when you're sitting on the last row of a plane, if you've even remotely listened to the pre-flight instructions, or taken a look at that safety card, which I would encourage each and every one of you to do each and every time you board an airplane, there's one thing you know for sure. Your closest exit is behind you. So I bolt to the galley. I'm the first passenger in the rear galley, and when I get there, the flight attendant is to my right. She does not realize we're in the water, and she's trying to crack open the left rear door. Well, I went over and began assisting her in trying to open that door. Well, there's no way we're going to get that door open. I mean, the water pressure on the outside is a lot stronger than she and I are. Then she looks around, she says, oh no, we're in the water. You have 2 minutes, go to the wings. And she was gone. By this time, more passengers have spilled into the rear galley, and they're trying to get the right rear door open, and it won't open either. And this is the point where I experienced my scariest moment, even scarier than before we landed in the river. Because in a matter of seconds, the water went from my ankles to above my chest. And it was 35-degree water on a 22-degree day. So it was Titanic cold. It felt like needles in my body. And I remember thinking, oh, Lord, please do not let me drown. I do not want to drown. And as crazy and as hokey as this may sound, I had this peace. I had this calm come over me, and I instinctively knew that panicking was not going to save my life. I knew I had to get off that airplane. Now, look in front of me in that nice, quiet, peaceful airplane atmosphere I was telling you about a few minutes ago. Well, that's a thing of the past. It's mass chaos. People are crying, people are screaming, people are climbing over the seats. Some people are trying to get their luggage out of the overhead. I wish that was a joke. But a lot of passengers in the rear rows are still trying to come to the back, thinking that the closest exit is the back. Well, I'm 100% sure we're not getting out the back. I mean, the back is sinking. So I did the only thing that I could do in the strongest, loudest Southern voice I could muster. I put up both my hands and began chanting, go to the wings, go to the wings, go to the wings. You know, after the experience, a reporter interviewed me. And he said, Mrs. Collins, what you did directing people to the wings, he said, it was just so heroic. I told him, I said, no, sir. I said, there was no heroism involved at all. I simply wanted out, and they were all in my way. I told him, I said, my mama taught me not to push. But people started to hear me, and they started to turn. They started to move towards the wings. And as we moved towards the wings, it was like walking uphill. And as we walked uphill, the water started to subside. There was a seat cushion floating by, so I grabbed it, put it on my right arm, and continued to chant, go to the wings, until I got to probably around row 15 or 16, because that's when I could see the light of day, because the over-the-wing exits were at rows 10 and 11. And once I could see the light of day, my chant turned into stay calm, keep moving, we're going to make it. And I made it. I took a right-hand turn. I came out on the right wing. I was never like way out on the tip of the wing because I was one of the last passengers out, so I was pretty close to the fuselage. But I remember stepping onto the wing and having two really clear, distinct thoughts. And the first thought came when I looked to my left, and about 400 yards in the distance, I could see the first ferry boat approaching. It was the New York Waterway's Thomas Jefferson. And as they say, she was coming full steam ahead. And I saw that boat approaching, and I thought, I'm not dying today. Today's not going to be my day. In the past 7-8 minutes, I really thought twice that I was going to die, but these people are going to save us. And I'll tell you, Sully, he did a fantastic job of getting our airplane safely in the river. But had it not been for the immediate, effective, and collective efforts of the first responders of New York and New Jersey, I do not believe we would have had 155 survivors. Our airplane sunk in 24 minutes. And in less than 17 minutes, they had all 155 of us safely rescued. So as Sullenberger says of them, thank you just seems so inadequate. But I always like to say thanks to them and to all first responders everywhere that put their lives on the line to save ours each and every day. And then my second thought was, why didn't this happen in June? Because I've never been so cold in my entire life. I began assessing the situation around me. And what I observed is that out of the wing, there is a slide that's deployed, and passengers are spilling onto this slide. It's turned into a makeshift raft. Then I look to my left, and I see the mom. And she's got the baby, and she has another child with her, and she's very distraught because her husband's farther out on the wing, and he's in complete shock, and she's in shock. And as a mother, I'm empathizing with her situation with these children. And then in my ear, I hear people in the raft yelling, "Throw the baby! Throw the baby!" And I'm like, what? And this man looks at me and he says, "Get those kids." So I thought, okay, I will. I'll get those kids. So I stepped off of the wing onto the raft. I was never really in the belly of the raft. I was just sort of on the back left edge. But I turned to the mom, and I'll never know what gave her the confidence in me. But I said, "Hand me your baby." So she stretched out her arms. I stretched out my arms, and she handed me 9-month-old Damien. And I turned and I gave him to someone more secure in the raft than I was there on the edge. Then I turned back to her and I said, "Give me your little girl." So she gave me her daughter, and we sat down like pretzel style on the edge of the raft. And at that point, my biggest concern was, if she and I fall back in this water, can I physically save us both? I've got my seat cushion. They're starting to throw down some life jackets at this point. And then I thought, okay, Vallie, you're the adult here. You've got to calm down. So I start rubbing her head, tell her it's going to be okay. I asked her mom, I said, "What's her name?" And she said, "Sophia." Well, I tell you, Sophia taught me something about the bravery of children. And she never cried. She never screamed. She never yelled. She never said a word. You know the only thing she did was she chewed on my arm through my sweater. That's when I knew it was not a bad dream, because she was treating my arm like a drumstick. And I looked down, and do you know what Sophia was holding? She was holding the baby blue baby blanket that was draped across the back of my seat when I boarded Flight 1549. I don't know if you choose to believe in signs or not, but I choose to think maybe I was tagged to help that family that day. But in actuality, she was the bigger blessing for me because she forced me to stay calm. We sat on our raft for probably 10 to 12 minutes, which is the time it took for our ferry boat, the Yogi Berra, to get close enough to grant us access, but not so close that they capsized the raft and pushed us back up against the plane. Ferry boats are not built to be rescue boats. They were doing the very best job they could do with the tool they had. And climbing out was not easy. The deck of the ferry boat was probably 15 feet or so above our heads, and there really wasn't a ladder. It was more, have you ever seen like a rope climbing wall? It was kind of like a grid. It was like that, but it was made out of rubber. And a lot of passengers physically struggled with just being able to climb out. Sophia and I got our turn. We climbed about halfway up. I pushed her up over my head. Some people on the boat took her on. I climbed on out. And it was a double-decker enclosed ferry boat. So I stepped on the first floor, and I thought, I see this like snack bar type area. And I thought, maybe there's a towel there. So because I'm so cold. I mean, I'm shaking uncontrollably. So I rummage around this snack bar. I look for a towel, and there's no towel. And then it hits me. I'm like, oh, I sent Steve a text message telling him my flight was crashing. And I'm alive. Well, I had left every possession on board the airplane. I had nothing except my wet clothes. But I see a gentleman with the phone. And I said, sir, may I please borrow your phone? He said, sure. So I called Steve. I said, honey, it's me. I'm okay. You know what he said? He said, call your mother. So I called my mother. And there's a language called hysteria. She was fluent on that afternoon. I have no idea what she said to me. But she said when she heard me say, I'm wet and I'm cold, she said, I knew you knew enough you'd be okay. I was taken to the Weehawken, New Jersey ferry terminal, and we were processed there for about 2 hours. And part of that processing required that those of us that were in wet clothes get out of the wet clothes. So I was given a men's New York Waterways uniform, which consisted of size 48 Dickie pants, a triple XL sweater, and a fantastic sock toboggan. But somebody, bless them, had the presence of mind to go down to the local store and buy a package of tube socks. And they came back, and they were passing out the dry tube socks. And I promise you, in that moment, if they had said $1 million or dry socks, I'd have picked the socks. It really is the little things in life that matter the most when you genuinely need them. I was taken to the University of Hoboken Medical Center. I was later released that night. My good fortune continued because Steve's cousin lives 5 blocks from that hospital, so I got to spend the night with family instead of a hotel room alone. But since that day, I have been asked hundreds of times, so Vallie, how has your life changed? Well, my life hasn't changed that much. I still live in beautiful East Tennessee. I'm still married to a great guy, and I have 3 fantastic children. But my sense of life purpose and life responsibility has definitely changed. And while I've taken a lot of learnings away from this experience, there's 5 key ones that I'm going to share with you quickly this afternoon. And let me warn you, none of these are rocket science. I'm not going to blow you away with my wisdom. But the first learning is the importance of kindness. Simple kindness. In the days after the crash, I remember thinking, had it ended tragically, and my face would have been one of 154 others on the front page of the USA Today, would the Avis bus driver that took me from the rental car lot to the terminal, would he have thought of me as a kind person? Did I smile at that gate agent when she scanned my ticket and told me to have a nice flight? Was I as friendly as I could possibly be to my seatmate? And what struck me about that is as we go through our day-to-day lives, we really have no idea who the other person is that we may have our very last interaction. It might be my spouse that I kiss goodnight, but it may very well be the drive-thru worker at Chick-fil-A that hands me my iced tea. So make a conscious effort to simply be kind to other people. Ralph Waldo Emerson once said, you can never do a kindness too soon, for you never know how soon it may be too late. The second learning is the learning of empathy. I've already told you, I am more of a thinker versus a feeler type person. If you had said to me, Vallie, you're going to be on a plane, it's going to crash, everyone's going to survive, and you're going to walk off without a scratch on you, how will you react? I would have said, I guess I'll just be happy to be alive and I'll move right on. Well, I am happy to be alive. The moving on piece was not so simple for me. I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, and that's a very real mental illness, disease, injury, whatever label you want to put on it. But in going through the process of dealing and healing from PTSD, it gave me a heightened sense of empathy for others and the emotional battles that others deal with. Whether it's depression, anxiety, manic, borderline, you name it. What I learned is that someone might look just fine on the outside, like I did, but you don't necessarily know what they may be wrestling with on the inside. So always be willing to give folks just a little bit of extra empathy, especially for those things that maybe you personally don't understand. The third learning is the importance of physical fitness. I've always enjoyed staying physically active. I like to play tennis, strength train, go skiing, go hiking with my family. But after being part of an experience like this one, it taught me just how important it is, to the best of our ability, to stay as physically fit as you can. Because you just don't know when you may find yourself in a situation where physically you've got to be able to save your own life, the life of a friend or family member, or maybe just be ready to help out a complete stranger. And the fourth learning is the learning of perspective. And this is a big one for me. This is a two-part one, if you will. And the first part about perspective is I have a whole new scale by which to calibrate how upset to get over something. If my golden retriever puppy chews up my favorite pair of running shoes, I can go get some more running shoes. My teenage son and I have a heated argument because he thinks finishing his video game is more important than finishing his math homework. I'm just glad I'm the mom that's still here that gets to make him do the math homework. You want to be the first person on I-75 South when we leave here today? That's fine. Cut me off on the on-ramp. I will get to where I'm going 18 seconds after you do. That cliche, don't sweat the small stuff, it's really quite true. There are very few things in our day-to-day life that are worth raising our blood pressure up over. And the second part about perspective is, there's nothing really special about me. I'm not a famous person. I'm not a politician. I can't sing. I'm really not even a great cook. And let me just back this up. I recently was asking my children, who are all, older adults, young adults, what their favorite food that I fixed for them was, growing up. And my 18-year-old answered, ice water. But in the days after the crash, I remember just being overwhelmed by the outpouring of love and support that I received. Whether it came in the form of a phone call, a note on my Facebook wall, an email, a casserole dish, a visit to our house, you name it. It was overwhelming. As morbid as this will sound, it was a bit like getting to go to my own funeral. And I remember thinking, wow, I didn't really realize how many relationships I had made in my short 37 years at that point, and how much people really cared. So it got me to thinking, if we all pretended that our life was a pebble that dropped into a still pond, there'd be a ripple effect, right? Well, if we pretended that the ripples represented all the relationships we made over the course of our lives, the ripples would be pretty far-reaching for each and every one of us in this room. So when you think about all the ripples in your life, I would encourage you to do a few things. I would encourage you to make sure those relationships are as healthy as they can possibly be. So for example, if there's maybe some forgiveness you need to extend or gratitude you need to express to one of the ripples in your life, I would encourage you to go ahead and get that done. I would also encourage you to never stop making the ripples. I think we all grossly underestimate the impact that our one life can have over so many others. Mother Teresa once said, I alone cannot change the world, but I can cast the stones into the waters and create many ripples. And the last learning is related to the concept of time. I have spent a lot of time just thinking about time over the past 13 and a half years. And it's a really interesting concept when you stop and think about it. Because no matter where you live on this planet, whether you speak English, Spanish, German, Japanese, we all understand this concept of a 24-hour day, a 7-day week, a 52-week year. But there's not a single one of us that knows exactly how much time we have left. I'll go ahead and answer a question for you. I did not fly home from the crash. I have flown 457 times since that day, but I did not fly home. U.S. Airways flew Steve to New York. They rented us this big black Lincoln Town Car, and he drove me the 13 hours back to East Tennessee. He said it was a bit like driving Miss Daisy. And we got home very late on Saturday night. My in-laws were there. They had been keeping the children. So as you can imagine, there's a joyful, tearful reunion in the entry hall. But I've been in the house about 2 minutes. And my mother-in-law, whom I actually love, she begins pulling on me. And I'm thinking, could you give me just a minute? I mean, I just got home. I was in this plane crash. Have you heard? It's all over the news. But I know my mother-in-law. And when she gets something in her mind, it is easier to just comply. Just do what she wants you to do. What she wants me to do is she wants me to come in this room in our house that we call the kids' den. Well, at Christmas time, just a few weeks before this, I'd remodeled the kids' den and made it more of like a family media room. And in part of that process, I bought this wall hanging. I didn't pay a lot of attention to what it said. I liked the shape, liked the colors. I got it at Target. It wasn't expensive. She pulls me into this room and she goes, "What is that?" I was like, "Oh, it's the wall hanging I got at Target." She says, "Read that." So I looked at it and it does have a very subtle message that says, "How great would life be if we lived a little bit of it every day?" And do you know what it has on it? It has an airplane. It's the only thing in my house with an airplane on it. So when I think about time, I think about taking time to live a little bit every day. Whatever living means to you. If it's having lunch with a friend, going on a run, reading a book, playing a round of golf, watching the Wildcats play, whatever it is. Take that time and acknowledge, this is my living moment for today. I will guarantee you, in the 3.5 minutes, which is the time when the birds knocked out both our engines till the time we landed on the Hudson River, there wasn't a single one of us on board that airplane that were worried about how many unanswered emails were in our inbox, how much money was in our checking account, and whether our beds were made or our dishwashers were unloaded. We were worried about the time we were going to miss with the people that we love. And I'll close with one final thought. Have you ever read a book, heard a song, seen a billboard, and you just felt like the words spoke to you, like they leapt up off the page? Well, that happened to me. It was the summer after the crash. I'm reading a novel, simple book of fiction titled The Art of Racing in the Rain. Has anybody read it? Okay, it's written by Garth Stein, and it is written from the voice of the family dog. And the family dog's name is Enzo. And throughout the book, Enzo is taking an inventory of all the humans around him. He's paying attention to what the humans do well and what they don't do so well, because he's getting himself prepared for when he's going to be a human. And when he's a human, he wants to be the best possible human that he can be. Well, the wife, the mother in the story, her name is Eve, and unfortunately, she passes away at a very young age. And after Eve passes away, this is what Enzo thinks. And in this case, the family dog spoke to me. Enzo says, "To live every day as if it has been stolen from death. That is how I would like to live. To feel the joy of life as Eve felt the joy of life. To separate oneself from the burden, the angst, the anguish that we all encounter every day. To say, I am alive. I am wonderful. I am. That is something to aspire to. When I'm a person, that is how I will live my life." So as people, I would encourage us all to live our lives being kind and empathetic towards others, take some time to stay physically fit, apply a big healthy dose of perspective to all situations, and maximize, utilize, enjoy, and give the time you have left. And I thank you for sharing a bit of that time with me today. Thank you. Thank you. No, don't stand up. I think we have a few extra minutes. If any of you have any questions, I am happy to answer those. I promise you won't scare me. I've raised teenagers. It takes a lot. So, and you can either come to the mic or yell real loud. My hearing's still pretty good. I'm not that old.
Do you keep in contact with any of the other passengers?
We do. I tell people not to compare us to soldiers in combat, but like soldiers in combat, nobody gets it like the people that were there get it. So there is something, I don't know if you want to say misery loves company, but being able to share that experience. So we have, a network of people. It's really interesting. I didn't realize, but airlines have sort of like HIPAA laws. They would not give us the names of any other passengers. So we had to find each other, but there were like 25 Bank of America employees on board, 52 people from Charlotte. So we started all finding each other. We've celebrated various monumental milestones. On the 1-year anniversary, most of us went to New York and they had the fire department boats. They took us back to the spot of the landing at the time of the landing. Grey Goose sponsored all the vodka, so we got to toast the geese. This artist from Mexico made these huge geese piñatas, so we got to beat the geese. On the 3-year anniversary, they brought the plane to Charlotte and had it on exhibit in Charlotte. So the 3-year anniversary, we got to go back and see the plane and take our seats, which was kind of a surreal experience. It was funny when we walked into the hangar. When they brought the plane from New York to North Carolina, they had to take the wings off to get it down the interstate system. And they shipped the wings separately. So at the time of the 3-year anniversary, they only had one of the wings back on the plane. So we walk into the hangar, and my youngest son was 7 at the time. He starts pulling on my dress. He's like, Mom. I'm like, what? He goes, that plane's only got one wing. And in his little mind, he's thinking, I'm 7. I wouldn't have gotten on that, So I had to explain to him that when I got on it, it had 2 wings. And then we had a big event at the 10-year anniversary, and I send and receive a lot more Christmas cards. I usually get a card every year from Sully with a handwritten note, so we do keep in contact. Yes, sir?
The world's been in trauma for 2 years. What's the process of coming out of PTSD?
Well, that is... Coming out of PTSD is different for every person. I can't answer the world's, but it's not as if, if you and I both broke our femur, the course to recovery is going to be pretty much the same for each of us, right? They're going to set it, they're going to cast it, and we're going to get on crutches and get off of it. And in 6 weeks, we'll be good to go. The brain is a much more complicated, much different organ to try to heal. I think PTSD, time helps for everyone. I've talked to veterans, car crash people. I've talked to a lot, and I think time is the best healer. But I do think one of the things I learned about PTSD is it doesn't present itself immediately. So I don't know if you work in HR or if you have a family member go through a trauma, they might be okay the first 2, 3, 4 weeks. And you're like, good. And then about 4, 6, 7, 8 weeks in, they're not themselves. I think that is very normal, very typical. And if you have someone like that in your life or it's you, I would encourage you to get some counseling, get some help, because it is very valuable to just be able to spill all your feelings onto somebody that is not part of your life and turn around and leave and have them help you. I have a lot of people in my life that love me, but there were some things I just couldn't say to them. I just didn't want to saddle them with that. So I think talking through it is probably one of the best things, and giving yourself a break. I learned in that first year is real critical after a trauma. And I remember my counselor, she had me take 3 months off from work because I had no margins in my life. I had 3 little kids, a husband that traveled, I traveled. She goes, you got to give your brain, a break. And I remember looking at her and going, well, what do you want me to do? I mean, I'd always been in school or worked or juggled a lot of balls. And she said, only do what you want to do. So only do things that are going to fill up your cup, not drain your cup. So I think for all of us, I mean, if we're doing things that make us happy, I'm not saying I don't still have to go to the grocery store, but he said, if there are people that are in your life that are not life-giving, kind of put them on the back burner for now, and focus on yourself. So, yes, ma'am.
So you said you stay in contact with a lot of the people that were on the plane. How are the children today?
Well, they are doing pretty well. The little girl is the same age as my youngest son, so she's now 18. The little boy, he'd be 13, and they have another sibling in their family now. So as far as I know, they're doing well and just raising teenagers and going through life together. Yeah. Oh, go ahead. I'll come to you next. Go ahead. I did see the movie Sully. In fact, if you watch Sully, if you go all the way to the end, we filmed a reunion scene, like when the credits roll. So in front of the plane in Charlotte, it was really cool. 85-year-old Clint Eastwood at that time is on the floor running the whole scene. He's got his iPad. I mean, he was really a delight to be around. It was a fun experience. A question I get asked a lot is how realistic do I think the movie is to the actual event? I think everything in the movie is pretty accurate because it's all kind of from Sully's perspective, except the evacuation scene. The evacuation scene in the movie was a lot calmer. I mean, in the movie, they're like, here's a blanket, it's cold out there. It was not like that. But it doesn't take away from the overall storyline. There's another movie that Nat Geo did called Miracle Landing on the Hudson, and I think they do a little better job with the evacuation scene and stuff. But overall, I would give Sully a thumbs up. Yes, sir. I did not, but my seatmate, when I came up from the galley, a funny thing, my seatmate always takes his shoes off before takeoff, so he didn't even have any shoes on the water. He ended up in New York barefoot in January. But as an aside, as I came up from the galley, I saw him and he was still there. And I'm kind of like, come on, let's go, let's get out of here. So I went on up, and I guess I had turned, and Brian is his name. He was still in the back when Sully came to the rear of the plane, and Sully looked at him and said, it's time to go, son. And so I do know for a fact he did walk the plane, but I did not see him, no.
So Vallie, this is our last question, and moderator privilege here. So kind of on a lighter note, did you get your luggage back?
We did get our luggage back. It took about 5 months. This is probably one of my favorite parts of the story. They sent us a letter in February saying, you're going to get your luggage back, but it's going to take a while. We've got to clean everything. Well, I had not flown U.S. Airways literally in 5 years. I always flew Delta, but this was a less expensive ticket. And so I was on U.S. Airways. So they had my wrong mailing address. So I called this cleaning company. And so I'm trying to give them the right address so when they do ship my stuff, it comes to the right place. And I'm on the phone with the man. He's like, well, do you have any unassociated items, meaning something without your name on it? So I'm like, just my coat. We're going through this. And as we're talking, I said, what a project. I've got 155 people. Everybody's probably got at least 3 to 4 items, figuring that out. What a jigsaw puzzle, right? And he said, ma'am, it's the best project we've ever had. He said, because typically I'm cleaning things up and sending it to victims' families. He said, the fact that you're getting your luggage back, he said, makes it the best project ever. So I did get it back. Thank you all. Y'all have a great conference. Thanks for having me.